Okay, so let me introduce our first speaker. So it is my pleasure to introduce our first invited speaker for the workshop, Jens Hopperdietzel. Jens received his PhD from Humboldt University in Berlin last year with a dissertation entitled Resultatives, a View from Oceanic Verb Serialization, which draws on careful investigation of resultative constructions in oceanic languages, specifically Samoan and Daakaka, to inform our understanding of the cross-linguistic realization of event and argument structure. Much of Jens's work follows this thread of inquiry into event structure, drawing on understudied oceanic languages, and while his presentation today will be on semantics, this work has spanned a number of other linguistic subfields, including morphology, syntax, and prosody. Jens is now at the University of Manchester as a postdoctoral research associate with Andrew Kuhn-Skarboden, investigating links between lexical semantics and lexical category. Today, Jens will be talking to us about manner-result polysemy in Daakaka. Take it away, Jens.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. Actually, it's my second time not coming to Singapore within a year, so I hope this will change in the future. But yeah, I'm looking forward to a very exciting conference, and I'm happy to open it with my talk on manner-result polysemy in Daakaka. So in the underdocumented Vanuatu language Daakaka, which is an Oceanic Austronesian language, a group of transitive verbs appear to be polysomous in lexicalizing either the manner or result meaning component. And we will investigate this on the example with the example of tiwia, which, for example, denotes an attempt of an agent to break something by applying manual force on its end. So basically a prototypical breaking action, which is something like this maybe, without the entailment that the object actually breaks when it occurs as an independent predicate. So this is shown in 1, where we have Bong Matiwia Peswente, Bong broke the branches by pressing, Bong pressed the branch manually, sorry. However, tiwia can also denote the result state of a change of state of an object, which can be translated as break in English. And this is only the case if it occurs in the non-initial position of a resultative serial verb construction. So this is shown in 2, where we have Bong matati via presvente, Bong broke the branches or the branch by cutting it. Now, by the application of manner and result diagnostics, I demonstrate that while verbs like tiwia can lexicalize manner and result components more generally, they do not so simultaneously. And instead, I will show that the distribution of manner and result meaning is determined by the morphosyntactic environment. So basically the contrast that we have seen in 1 and 2, namely an independent tiwia, which gives rise to a manner interpretation, which can be translated as press manually, and a serialized tiwia, which gets a result interpretation, which can be translated as break. Now, these observations have 3 major implications for cross-linguistic study of lexicalization patterns and root meaning, which I just give you here in advance. So roots can be underspecified. So the same root can either denote the manner or result component of an event. Second, manner and result meaning components are in complementary distribution, as polysemous verbs do not lexicalize manner and result components simultaneously. And third, since the distribution of manner result meaning is complementary, it also suggests that manner result polysemy is not derivational, as it would violate the monotonicity hypothesis on verb formation. Now, focusing on the influence of the morphosyntactic environment, I will propose a structural analysis of the manner result polysemy in Daakaka. And in particular, I will argue that the relative syntactic position of a semantically underspecified acategorial root to its event-introducing verbalizing head, little v, determines interpretation of the root as a manner and the result. So basically, we will see that the root will get its idiosyncratic meaning in the respective manner or result position in the syntax, which can then be analyzed as a form of contextual root allosomy, which has been proposed by or discussed by Levins in 2014-2010, in which the root gets its interpretation only in its syntactic configuration. Now, how will we get there? I will first give you a brief introduction into the distribution of manner and result meaning more generally. Then we will take a closer look on the properties of manner result polysemy in Daakaka. Then I will show you my approach, which is a configurational analysis. And then I will briefly discuss some alternative ways of analyzing it, showing that I think at least the configurational analysis is more likely to explain the facts that we have seen. And then I will finish with a conclusion. So to start our investigation, I will provide some background on the decomposition of verbal predicates regarding their event and argument structure that will be relevant in our investigation of manner-result polysemy in Daakaka. And thereby I will discuss the distribution of manner and result meaning components in verbal predicates in English primarily, because this is basically the language where it's best documented, showing that they are presumably in complementary distribution. And in particular, which will also be very important for our investigation in Daakaka, I show that the presence of manner result meaning components in verbal predicates can be detected by independent semantic and syntactic diagnostics. So we can really try to classify a verbal predicate with the help of those diagnostics, and we don't have to speculate about them that much, at least about the meaning. Now, in decompositional approaches, verb meaning is commonly divided into two structural types. So the first one is the event structure templates built from the combination of grammatical primitives. So basically, this gives us the event skeleton, and then roots, which provide the idiosyncratic meaning to the skeleton. And we will see what this means in a bit, but the grammatical primitives that are relevant here are act, which denotes an abstract action event, and cause, which introduces a causative relation between two eventualities. Now, if we look at verbal predicates, it has been argued that they can differ with respect to their complexity and the contribution of the root in the structure of the verb, to the structure of the verbs. So on the one hand, we have atomic predicates, which denote eventualities that cannot further be decomposed. And there are basically two types of those eventualities, namely, of those atomic predicates, namely dynamic events or dynamic activities that are modified by a manner root. So for example, in 5a, we have here this abstract action event, which is modified by the root wipe here, giving us a predicate like Peter wiped the floor. However, on the other hand, we have states, which are named by the stative roots themselves, which are assumed to be named by the stative roots themselves. So we get something like the floor is clean, where we have clean and its argument floor, and the root itself denotes the event that it's naming. Now, on the other hand, we have complex predicates that denote eventualities that can be further decomposed. So, for example, in causative accomplishments, which will be the only really relevant type of complex predicates in this talk. For example, an underspecified action event is in a causative relation with a stative expression named by the root. So, for example, we can have this as clean as a transitive causative verb. Here, Peter is doing some underspecified action, which is not specified by a root, but this action is in a causative relation with the state, and the state is named by the root. So we get a verb like causative verb like clean, Peter cleaned the floor. Now, this shows us that roots fall into two ontological classes depending on their compositional function. So on the one hand, we have event modifiers, which are basically manner roots that specify the manner of the action, as in 5a. And on the other hand, we have result groups that act as event arguments. So basically, they are in an argument relationship with the causative operator here. And those are result groups naming the result state and the causative accomplishment. So for example, clean, break, or destroy, whereas we have manner verbs like wipe, hammer, and spur. Now, based on their investigation of the distribution of manner and result components in verbal predicates, Levin and Rappaport have famously proposed or observed or described the manner result complementary as a lexicalization constraint on verbal predicates. One of way to formalize that is maybe as an 8. So manner and result meaning components are in complementary distribution. Added by me, monomorphemic verb lexicalizes only one. And therefore, the principle of manner result complementary predicts that a single root cannot function as an event modifier or as an event argument simultaneously. So we won't get a structure as a 9 where the same root modifies the action event, but also names the result state. Now, this constraint is based on several morphosyntactic and semantic diagnostics that are sensitive to the manner-result complementary, or have been argued to be sensitive to the manner-result complementary. And here we'll just briefly introduce the conative and the anti-causative construction for English. So on the one hand, manner verbs such as wipe can appear in the conative construction, whereas result verbs such as break cannot. So we get something like Peter wiped at the table, but we get not something like Peter broke at the table, giving us two classes of verbs in this type of construction. And interestingly, on the other hand, result verbs such as break can appear in the anti-causative construction, whereas manner verbs such as wipe cannot. So we get something like Peter, the table wiped, where the agent is omitted. So we don't get this. So this is odd in English, of course. But we get something like the table broke. So what we see here is that, well, break is not able to appear in the conative construction. It is able to appear in the anti-causative construction, whereas wipe shows the exact complementary sensitivity. Now, cross-linguistic studies have shown that the general tendency of manner-result complementary also holds for verbal predicates in other languages, which give this general constraint, or this general principle of manner-result complementary a potentially universal flavor, but we definitely need more studies to verify this. And also, just to mention, also for languages like English, it's not very or 100% clear whether this holds for all predicates or whether it's just a general tendency. However, if we adopt for this talk that there is like a clear-cut distinction between manner and result, we observe something rather unexpected, because some verbs appear to lexicalize both manner and result meaning simultaneously, as they are sensitive to both manner and result diagnostics. So in English, for example, the verb cut can appear in the conative construction, like manner verb as wipe, as we have seen above, but it can also appear in the anti-causative construction, like result verbs, as we have also seen above. So we get this in 12. So Peter cut at the rope is fine, but also the word cut on the rock is also fine, which is quite unexpected given the examples we have seen so far. Now, as this observation seems to falsify the hypothesis of manner-result complementary, it has been demonstrated that in the manner use of cut, the result components drops out. And this can be shown, for example, if we continue the respective sentences with a denial of a result state. So while denial of a result state is fine in the conative construction, so Peter cut at the rope, but the rope didn't cut, is fine, it is not fine in the anti-causative construction. So the rope cut on the rope, but the rope did not cut should be infelicitous. So this shows us that manner and result polysemy actually supports the underlying assumption of manner and result complementary, as manner and result are not lexicalized simultaneously by them. Now, what we have learned so far is that verbal predicates can be decomposed into semantic primitives, providing the event structure template and lexical roots that contribute idiosyncratic meaning. We have seen that verbs differ in whether they lexicalize a manner or result meaning component, and crucially, both meaning components are in complementary distribution. But we've also seen that some verbs are polysemous and that they can realize or lexicalize either manner or result. Now, with this background, we move on to the manner and result polysemy in Daakaka. Now here, more generally, maybe as a general comment before we do that, the distribution of manner and result meaning components has been primarily investigated on well-documented languages such as English. So everyone who's working on lexical semantics in lesser studied languages is, I think, invited to look at manner and result in distribution in those languages as well, because I think it's a quite interesting and nice topic to look further into, and it's quite well described for English, and there are a lot of diagnostics which can be used for other languages as well. So maybe this just as a general comment at the beginning. However, in this talk, I will take a closer look on the distribution of manner and result in verbal predicates in the Oceanic language Daakaka, which exhibits the class of polysemous verb, as we have seen in the introduction. So to repeat, the verb tiwiye appears to be ambiguous between a manner and result verb determined by its morphosyntactic environment. So as an independent predicate, TripleA denotes this attempt of an agent to break something by applying manual force to its end. So here we have a little icon to illustrate this. So we get like an action which is similar to those. But in the non-initial position of resultative zero construction, it denotes a change into a broken state of the object. So also here illustrated by the icon. Now, what I will show is that by the application of manual result diagnostics, I show that these polysemous verbs more or less behave like their English counterparts in denoting either a manner or result, but not simultaneously. Before we move on to the data, just some background on Daakaka. It's a northern central Vanuatu Oceanic Austronesian language, which is spoken by a relatively small community, like around 1,000 speakers on the island of Ambrym, which belongs to the Vanuatu Islands in the Pacific Ocean. So maybe this is closer to Papua New Guinea. So for someone in Australia, or for those who are not that familiar with the oceanic, with the Pacific Ocean, but they're more to the left on the map, so to say. Now, this study is part of my fieldwork on causativity and resultivity in Daakaka, which started in 2017. And most of the data and the recitation material is accessible at the Caprileone Language Archive at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. So you can have a look at the data there, or at least some of the data. And today's data specifically comes from elicitation sessions with 3 native speakers from the village of Emiutungan on Ambrym, based on a self-designed questionnaire that targets manner and result meaning. The study was conducted in 2019, before the whole travel restriction were in place. And yeah, this self-designed questionnaire was also supported by picture-based and storyboards if it was necessary to clarify the context in which the verbs should appear. Now, a basic clause in Daakaka has an SVO word order with a pre-verbal TMA subject marker, which would be the yam here, and the verb final transitivity marker, which is here the ane. This transitivity marker can also be suppletive, as we will see. So we get a basic sentence like the birds cooked white yam, which is straightforward SVO. Now, jumping into the lexical semantics of TripleA, I will first apply some manner diagnostics. So basically, diagnostics that have been argued to be sensitive to a manner component. And this will include instrumental modification, object theta roles, and object deletion. So I will start with instrumental modification. And here, manner and result verbs have been argued to differ regarding their instrumental modification they can co-occur with. So on the one hand, we have manner verbs, which are expected to be more restrictive or more sensitive, as the instrument must satisfy the manner component. So basically, it must satisfy the event denoted by the root that specifies the action event. On the other hand, we have result verbs, which are expected to be less restrictive, as the causing event itself is underspecified, as shown here, where we don't have a root that modifies this action event. Now, in English, for example, the manner verb wipe is more restrictive than the corresponding result verb clean, as shown in 18. So we can get something like Peter wiped the table with his hands or with a cloth, but Peter cannot wipe the table with a broom, for example, at least not in the prototypical way you would use a broom, I guess. On the other hand, the verb clean does not show such restrictions. So we can clean the table with hands, with a cloth, with a broom. So basically, we can clean it with everything as long as we can imagine a situation that the table becomes clean after using this instrument. Now, in Daakaka, instrumental modification of TripleA is sensitive to its syntactic environment. So as an independent predicate, TripleA necessarily refers to a manual action, which is why instrumental modifiers like anete, for example, like with an ax, are infelicitous, which is shown in 19. So bong press the branches manually with an ax is infelicitous. However, as a serialized predicate, instrumental modifiers like anete become felicitous, suggesting that the manner component drops out. So we can get something like bong matat TripleA presente anete. So Bong broke the branches with an X by cutting them is fine. You will see that in the serialized construction, of course, there is always this initial manner verb, and we will talk about this later, but we can ignore this for now for the diagnostics. So this shows us that while TW entails a manner component as an independent predicate, it does not so in the non-initial position of resultative single verb constructions, as it's only in the independent use, instrumental modifiers are restricted. Now, second diagnostics come from object theta roles. So manner and result verbs differ in the theta roles they assign to the object. So manner verbs, in the kinds of manner verbs, the object must be able to satisfy the patient role of the action event, whereas in result verbs, the object must be able to satisfy the holder role of the result state. So basically, we have a different kind of relation of the argument to its event. And this can be shown for English in 22, for example, where the teapot cannot satisfy the patient role of a manner verb such as drink. So you can drink the tea, but you cannot drink the teapot. But the holder role of a result verb like fill. So Mary filled the teapot, but she could probably not fill the tea. Now, similar restrictions on theta roles have been observed in the context of Daakaka theory. And again, determined by the morphosyntactic context. So independent TWIA selects for long, thin objects that an agent can take in a sense to perform a pressing action on its ends. So therefore, a branch is a possible object, but a tree, for example, is not unless you are in like some magical story where you have giants that take trees and break them, then it becomes, but usually if like we talk about the actual word, then this is odd. So we cannot get something like Bong manually press the trees, basically because the trees are not able to satisfy the patient role of TWIA. On the other hand, serialized TWIA does not exhibit such restrictions. So instead, all objects that qualify as a holder of a broken result state are available, which is why now the tree at an object is felicitous too. So we get something like Bong broke the trees by cutting them. For example, water as a mass noun could, or water could not appear in this position, as water, as we all know, cannot break. So this shows us that the theta role assigned by TWIA to its object is determined by its by its syntactic position. Now, last diagnostic form manner comes from object deletion. So object deletion has been shown to be subject to the argument per sub-event condition, which is stated in 25. So basically, the observation is that there must be at least one argument XP in the syntax per sub-event in the event structure. And this how this becomes a diagnostic. It is that manner verbs differ from their result verbs also in their event structure, as manner verbs are basically mono-eventive because they only entail an action event, whereas bi-eventive result verbs entail two eventualities, namely the action event and the result state. And if we would delete the single object of the result state of a causative result verb, the result state would be left without any argument, violating the argument per sub-event condition. Now, in English, for example, manner verbs like scrub can occur without an object, whereas result verbs like break cannot. This is in 27 and 28. So we get something like all night Kim scrub, but we don't get something like all night Kim broke. Now, this diagnostic is a bit hard to apply on the Daakaka data in the first place, because Daakaka is a prodrug language that generally allows the omission of discourse prominent objects. But we can, I was very glad to find out that this diagnostic is still applicable because the syntactic absence, so not only the overt but also the covered absence of an object, is indicated by the absence of transitive morphology. So this is shown in 29, where we have the transitive verb form, Angela makokane me sente, Angela cooked the food, where we have the transitive makaane here. If the food here is discourse prominent, it can be dropped, but still we see the transitive marker here showing that there is like some covered realization of the object here, for presumably something like little pro. However, if the object is like structurally and semantically more or less absent, then we won't get the transitive marker here, and we just see the plain verb form, Angela cooked, Angela cooked. Now, like other manner verbs, such as cook above, independent tiwir has an intransitive suppletive verb form tiwir that indicates the absence of a covert object. So we get something like bong ma tiwir, bong press manually, and there is no further information about the object. And crucially, serialized tiwir cannot appear in its intransitive form, as it's the case with other result verbs. That's, for example, mililiane, where we see the non-suppletive transitive marker ane. So we won't get something like bong ma tat tiwir, bong work by cutting. Well, this shows us that object deletion is independent. It's possible for independent tiwir, as it is a mono-eventive verb, but it is not available for serialized tiwir, as it is a bi-eventive result. Now, so far, the manner diagnostics indicate that the morphosyntactic context determines the entailment of a manner component in polysemous verbs like tiwir. However, now we will apply some additional diagnostics that are have been argued to be sensitive to the entailment of a result component, and this will be a denial of a result, resultatives, and serializing causatives, which will be a language-specific diagnostic. Now, to start, due to the different event structure properties, manner and result verbs differ in whether the denial of a result leads to a contradiction. So while mono-eventive manner verbs don't entail a result state, the denial of a result is not expected to be contradictory. However, bi-eventive result verbs which entail a result state, in this context, the denial of this result state should lead to a contradiction. Now, and this can be illustrated by English, where denial of result is only felicitous in the context of a manner verb like wipe, but not in a result verb such as clean. So Mary wiped the table, but the table did not become any cleaner, should be fine. Whereas Mary cleaned the table, but the table did not become any cleaner, should be infelicitous. Now, this observation, interestingly, holds also for polysemous verbs in Daakaka. So independent tiwir allows for denial of a result without a contradiction. So something like bong pressed the branch manually, but the branch did not break is totally fine. Whereas in serialization, tiwir does not allow for a denial of a result, which indicates that the result state is part of the event structure in this context. So we don't get something like bong ma tatiwir presente, a presentes to se chup, and bong broke the branch by cutting it, but the branch did not break. This shows us that the felicity of a denial of results is determined again by the morphosyntactic position, showing that tiwir entails a result component only in serializing context. Now we take a closer look on these serializing contexts, namely on the resultative serial verb constructions. And in English, the counterpart would be like resultative constructions, as shown in 36. So the presence here, the argument here is that the presence of a manner or result meaning component restricts the combinatorial properties of manner and result verbs in resultative construction. This can be shown in 36. So if we have a manner verb, like Peter pounded the metal flat, we can further specify the pounding event, for example, as a hammering event, but specifying it as a wiping event is rather infelicitous, because a pounding event is certainly not a wiping event. On the other hand, with causative result verbs like dim, for example, we can further specify the result state. So Peter dimmed the room to the level of starlight, but we cannot specify this result state with like something completely unrelated, like Peter dimmed the room empty, where empty cannot further specify the level of dimmedness of the room. Now, in Daakaka, resultative meaning is primarily expressed by resultative serial verb construction, as we have already seen, in which an initial manner verb specifies the manner of the causing action, with the result state denoted by the non-initial predicate. So something like bong ma tam mililiane leante, bong made the tree small by cutting it, where we have the serialized form tam mililiane, cut, make small. And crucially, the distribution of verb classes in Daakaka resultative serial construction is fixed. So manner verbs such as tahte, which means cut, can occur in the cannot occur in the non-initial result position. So as shown in 38, here te manner verb like te occurs in non-initial position. This is ungrammatical, whereas a result verb such as wa, which means split, cannot appear in the initial manner position. So we won't get something like bong mawa mililiane presente, bong split the branches into small pieces. However, polysemous verbs such as tuia can appear in both positions. And in the initial position, tuia denotes the manner of the causing action, so manual pressing action, with the result state denoted by the non-initial causative verb. So we get something like tuia mililiane, make small by pressing it manually. And on the other hand, it can also appear in the non-initial position, as we have seen with like a lot of examples before, where we get something like cut, break. And crucially, tuia combines with various manner and result verbs in resultative zero construction in the respective initial or non-initial position, indicating that manner and result meaning is in complementary distribution. So if we have tuia in the manner position, it can combine with all sorts of result denoting causative verbs, like split, kill, or be small. And on the other hand, if it occurs as a result denoting verb in the second position, it can combine with all sorts of manner verbs in the initial position, like cut, sit, and whatever we can imagine. And even more strikingly, serialized tuia can be combined with its own manner variant resultative zero construction without redundancy in meaning. This highlights again that the two verbs express like the different parts of the resultative construction, the manner and the result thing, without denoting both at the same time. And this shows us that the distribution, this shows us that tuia has a manner and a result variant, basically. And now finally, a note on the serializing condition of result tuia, which we have seen is restricted to this non-initial position of resultative zero constructions. And interestingly, this is the case for all causative result verbs in the language, as they are subject to a serializing condition. And this can be stated in 43. So if a verb denotes the causative relation between an event and a state, it must combine with a manner verb that specifies the result, the causing event. And therefore, causative verbs, no matter like what their appearance is, whether they are derived causatives like mililiane or lexical causatives like split, or polysemous causatives, so to say, as tuia, they all cannot appear as independent predicates. And this shows us that the serializing condition on tuia is not really special to the manner, the polysemous status of the verb, but it is a general constraint on result. So to summarize our study, we can see that manner and result diagnostics indicate the verb tuia exhibits two variants, which are determined by the morphosyntactic context. So we have manner tuia, which is an independent predicate. It can appear as an independent predicate and in the initial position of resultative zero verb constructions. And we have a result tuia, which only occurs in the non-initial position of resultative zero verb constructions. Now, this shows us that tuia is an instance of a manner-result polysemy, and that the same verb can either express the manner of an action or the result state of an underspecified action. Yet it shows that manner and result meaning is in complementary distribution, which further provides cross-linguistic support for a manner-result complementary. So now we have seen a lot of data, and now I will give you an idea of an analysis for this. Now, to account for the contextually determined manner-result polysemy in Daakaka, I propose that a syntactic analysis in which underspecified roots get their idiosyncratic meaning in the context of an event introducing categorizability. And thereby, I will analyze manner-result polysemy as a case of contextual allosomy. Now, some background. Adopting a syntactic approach on event decomposition, event structure is built within the syntactic derivation by designated functional heads, which I will label as res for result, little v, and voice. And this will be the basic configuration where the little v takes a result phrase and the voice takes a VP. Now, the categorizing head little v introduces an event, e, here, and the precategory result head introduces a state eventuality as here. Now, I will assume that causative semantics, if present, so in causative accomplishments, is contextually interpreted at LF when little v embeds the state denoting complement, as shown in 48. where the causative interpretation of this functional head is determined by a state in its complement position. So basically, whether there is a result P present or not. Now, the external argument is introduced on top by a separate agentive voice head, which combines the VP via event identification. However, this head will not be relevant for our discussion here. Now, in this basic syntactic configuration, which somehow resembles this event template idea from the decompositional semantic approaches, which I've introduced in section 2. Acategorial roots can be inserted in two ways, depending on their compositional status. So on the one hand, mana roots like hammer as event modifiers are merged in the position designated for event modification, which has been argued to be sister of v bar, and further move to little v to derive the verbal predicate. So here, as the little v is a transitive, introduces a transitive eventuality. Little v also introduces a patient argument, which is then the metal, and this event of where a metal takes part is further is then identified as a hammering event if a mana root merges. In contrast, result roots like flat merge as event arguments in the complement position of little v within a precategorial result P. So here, basically, the result head introduces a holder role between the state and an object, and this state is then identified as the clean state, and then the sole complex moves to little v to form the result for to clean. And yeah, additionally, as I've said, the causative semantics are contextually interpreted as little v, which introduces the event here, takes an event state denoting phrase as an argument, and is therefore interpreted as introducing causative semantics. Now, by the assumption that a single categorizer can only categorize a single root, and also by the assumption that the same root cannot appear in two positions simultaneously, the mana result complementary follows from more general syntactic restriction on categorization of roots, basically. So this is shown in 52, where wipe and clean cannot simultaneously modify something. The same root cannot merge in both positions. So this gives us a syntactic explanation for mana result complementary. Now, to restrict that the root may occur in both positions, so that the same root can appear as a mana or result root in the mana or result position, it is commonly assumed that roots are listed for the ontological class, which defines their syntactic and semantic properties. So we have mana roots and result roots. We've seen at the beginning, and mana roots are then assumed that to only merge as modifiers, and result roots only merge as arguments within the result phrase. However, the observation of mana result polysemy, as in Daakaka TripleA, questions these assumptions of these two clear ontological classes, as the same root appears to function as a mana or as a result root. So it appears that it could merge either as an event modifier or as an event argument. And therefore, and additionally, mana and result roots not only differ in their ontological class, but crucially also in their eventuality type they denote. So whether they introduce an event or a result state. And therefore, I think that polysemous verbs must be semantically underspecified and refer to abstract concepts only. So basically some conceptual knowledge that is linked to the underspecified root, which is not itself giving you some type of event description or individual description in other contexts. And therefore, I propose that roots that are subject to mana result polysemy are underspecified with respect to their ontological class and can merge at either event modifier or event argument. So this is then, for example, TripleA, or another root in Daakaka would be Singawe, but also like cut and climb, as those roots have been argued to be polysemous in English. So consequently, such roots receive their idiosyncratic interpretation only in the morphosyntactic context they appear in, and this can be done via contextual allosomy. So basically what we see is that the root, an underspecified root, is introduced as a mana if it appears in the mana position in the syntax, or as a result root if it appears configuration, the syntactic configuration in which result roots appear. Now, in particular, the root tiwia in Daakaka gets its manner interpretation, like press manually, when it merges in the modifying position of little v, but it gets its result interpretation in the argument position. This can be formalized as in 57. Now, therefore, manner result polysemy suggests that idiosyncratic root meaning is ultimately configurational, though not completely unrestricted. So it's still restricted. It's sometimes better to highlight something by repetition. So to summarize, manner and result can be reinterpreted as structural notions that are defined in relation to the event introducing head little v. Giving the categorization restriction on roots, a manner result complementary follows from the structure building constraints and does not operate on the verb or root level per se. However, manner result polysemy suggests that roots can be underspecified with respect to their ontological class and receive their idiosyncratic meaning in the syntactic derivation, though this does not necessarily imply that all roots are functioning as underspecified, but roots can also be listed for classes, or their ontological class, of course. Now, this is, of course, maybe not the only view one can have on manner result polysemy, but in the following, I will briefly discuss some alternative accounts based on potential alternative analysis, like homophonicity, coercion, and derivation, which I think all struggle to account for the Daakaka data. So an alternative account may analyze manner result polysemy as the result of accidental homophonicity, and that manner and result variant of the same verb are derived by two distinct roots that have to happen the same phonological spell out. Something like in 58a, we have one root tiwia, which is manner root, which means something like press manually. And on the other hand, we have a result root tiwia, which means something like be in a broken state. Yet, such an analysis hardly catches the regular prototype relation between manner and result variants of polysemous verbs. So as shown for English, the manner variant, so something like cut, for example, describes an action performed with a black-like instrument, which usually results in the result state denoted by the same verb, so a clean separation, for example. And crucially, this observation also holds for Daakaka, as all polysemous verbs denote a prototypical manual action in this manner variant that commonly results in the result state denoted by the result variant. So as you have seen, we have something like perform manually pressure, which usually or commonly results in a broken state. But we have also the polysemous verb sengawe, which means something like rattle on something with your hands, usually with the intention to open something. And in the result use, it means just to open something. Now, under the configurational approach proposed here, such regularities are expected as the idiosyncratic meaning of both the manner and the result variant of polysemous verbs are linked to the same abstract conceptual knowledge of the same root. And therefore, I think manner result polysemy is unlikely to be a case of homophonicity. Now, another account might analyze manner result polysemy in Daakaka as a case of coercion, as has been argued for change of stative alternations in oceanic languages, in other oceanic languages. And under such an analysis, tiwia would be presumably a manner verb, which is coerced into a result verb only when it occurs in the syntactic environment in which the result verbs usually appear in, so in the non-initial position of result verb constructions. However, Daakaka exhibits two types of transitivity alternation in the context of manner and result verbs, which are indicated by the absence of transitive morphology. So on the one hand, manner verbs can form unergative predicates in the absence of a patient verb. So we have seen this before. Angela cooked, where the patient is missing. And we have result verbs can have unaccusative forms in the absence of an agent argument. So something like Mililiane, for example, to make small, can appear in the state of inchoative form, Leente mamilili, the tree is or becomes. And crucially, polysemous verbs can participate in both types of transitivity alternations, as illustrated by tiwia, which show additional root suppletion in the context of a result verb. So on the one hand, we get this pair tiwia as a manner predicate, but we also get the suppletive and accusative result form sitchup here. and if in the intransitive context. Now, if manner result polysemy in Daakaka were a case of coercion, such complex suppletive paradigms would rather be unexpected, given that an intransitive manner variant already exists. So basically, if TripleA would be coerced in this position, we would also expect that TripleA can be realized with its intransitive form probably there. However, under configuration analysis instead, the distinct morphological forms are expected given the different morphosyntactic environments. Root Pearson, which is basically reflected by the locality constraints on root suppletion in the literature. And this shows us that manner result polysemy is unlikely to be a form of coercion. And a second argument also comes from the monotonicity hypothesis, which also argues against an account that manner result meaning might be derived from one another by some sort of covert morphosyntactic process. So we could imagine, under such an account, we could imagine that TripleA, as a manner verb, for example, is coerced into a result, is derived into a result verb by some sort of suffix or some sort of suffix that derives a causative result verb from the manner verb. However, the semantic rule that would describe the derivational step from the manner to the result verb would violate a fundamental principle on the semantic verb formation, namely monotonicity. And this is because the manner and the result meaning is not entailed by the respective variants. And therefore, the complementary meaning would need to be removed. So basically, we would need to remove here the event modifying description, press manually here, and if we would derive it vice versa, we would have to delete the result state, both violating the monotonicity hypothesis. And this shows us then that manner result polysemy is also unlikely to be a result of derivation. So to conclude, Daakaka exhibits a class of polysemous verbs that, such as TripleA, which means something like press manually or break, which can entail either a manner or result component, but not simultaneously. Daakaka manner result polysemy therefore strengthens the underlying intuition of manner result complementary as a fundamental lexicalization constraint on verbal predicates from the perspective of underdocumented Oceanic languages. However, the contextually determined distribution of manner result meaning suggests that manner result complementary does not operate on the verb or the root level, but follows from the morphosyntactic configuration in which the root appears in. And consequently, polysemous roots are underspecified and refer to abstract conceptual meaning only, and receive their idiosyncratic interpretation as manner and result roots in their relative configuration to the verbal category little v via contextual analysis. Yeah, thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to your comments.
All right, thanks, Jens. We have around, I guess, 12 minutes for questions. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the raise hand function or type it in the chat. So I see a question from Vera. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Jens, for this talk. I have two questions. One is conceptual and the other concerns cross-linguistic variation. So under this structural view, are you assuming that events and states are distinct semantic types? Is this a prerequisite for such a view? Or you could also say that maybe it's just one semantic type of eventualities, right? And then there's also views like von Stechus that says states actually don't even have an eventuality argument, they only have a time argument, and then you have event arguments. So I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about kind of the, what type of assumptions you have to make about the semantic ontology of types for this account to work. And then ask my second question later on.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, like in this talk, of course, I assume that states and events are somehow different, although I would assume that they belong to like a macro type of eventualities. So something like situations, maybe other notations. However, I'm not 100% sure whether this is really relevant for the analysis. So even if you have, like if they would be the same type of eventuality, they, under the configurational analysis of at least, there would be in different structural positions where contextual allosemy would still hold, I think. Which would be maybe similar to assumptions where you have an underspecified root which merges with a little n hat, classifying it as a noun, and you get an individual, for example. Yeah, I'm not sure with for the predictions for the monotonicity hypothesis, to be honest, because there it usually is about operators, and if those would be like the same type, I guess that maybe the monotonicity hypothesis would not rule out for sure conversion or a derivational analysis, at least in the direction of adding a result state. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Next we have Mitchell. Please ask the question.
Thank you, Jens. I actually had a very similar question, but I guess building on that, I'm wondering whether, so if we do treat states and events very distinctly, I wonder if actually you could get away with your contextual allosemy rules not making reference to the syntactic environment, but actually just saying, you know, this root, when it is in a context where it has a particular type, so it's supposed to supply an event description versus a state description, it has a slightly different meaning. And I was wondering, you know, how we might distinguish that. And I guess that would have to do, the place to look might be, you know, other syntactic contexts where arguably you want those similar kinds of meanings. I don't know exactly what those syntactic contexts would be, but something where it's not in a predicative position, something like that, right? And then see whether you get the same kind of, whether it tracks the same kind of meanings. But that was my thought related to Vera's comment. But
yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
I think maybe related observation, of course, it needs to be tested, would be like in nominalizations, because there we might get different interpretations based on the different interpretations of the root. So whether we have a break or a manual pressing, for example, or maybe something completely else. So I think this would be a nice way to test the hypothesis, whether this is like if we can test how much structure there is actually, if we have a little v-hat or not, and so on. This would give us probably more information about whether this configurational analysis really needed, or whether, as you said, we can just say that if it appears in a position, then it is interpreted as manner, and if it appears in another position, it is interpreted as result. But still, we need I guess, the assumption that those roots are underspecified to begin with, and how this is modeled is, I guess, then probably more flexible than maybe presented here. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Malta, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, and thank you, Jens. I mean, I knew I've seen some of this material, but this allosomy discussion is really interesting, right? So I've scanned through your document, and so you're careful to just stay with the surface reflexes, right? Like you specified two different like surface meanings, but still somehow the question arises. You said it's an underspecified root, and then you were careful to say, well, it's sort of syntactically underspecified in this manner result thing. But so, do you think it's feasible to like come up with a unified underspecified basic conceptual meaning, right? I mean to that end, to see that, I guess one would need to look at more closely at what kind of objects the two verbs can like specify, right? So like can anything that qualifies as a subject of a being broken state, can that be the object of this manually exerting manual pressure action? Can that be? So is that, do you know if there's like any more commonalities apart from this like prototypical relations that you pointed out between these two verb instantiations? Because it's still, I mean, that would be nice, right? I mean, I still feel a bit uncomfortable about this allosomy, and you only see the surface reflexes. And as long as that is the case, you might still get away with some sort of like regular polysemy or ambiguity account.
Yeah, so yeah, I think I've showed this in section, like with respect to the objects that can be taken by the different verbs. We have seen that they actually differ. So in the result use, there is less where the result is less restrictive than the manner use, basically. So this is why we can get a tree here, which can satisfy the holder state of a broken event, the holder relation, but in the patient evasion relation, we cannot have the tree, at least in prototypical context where the verb is used, as in like real word stories. And yeah, so yeah, maybe that is true, but I think the intuition is still that, since this is not only the case for TripleA here, but as I've showed you, it's also the case for like a lot of polysemous verbs in other languages as well. So we have the cut in English, climb in English. We also other verbs that are polysemous in Daakaka, like TripleA and Singa. We all have this prototypical relation. And if we want to accept this as an accident, this prototypical relation is there, and maybe this is also maybe why we see this as a polysemy at all, because they happen to have the same spell out. I'm not sure if this is really satisfying, because this this prototypical relation seems to be tied to this polysemy in these verbs, at least.
Yeah, I mean, if I may, I mean, that may be true, but normally, like in other instances of polysemy, it is possible to start out with the basic meaning and then derive the other meanings, like with a regular semantic process, like adding some relation, right? You go from if you say I drank the bottle, then it's like the bottle containing some liquid or something, right? And then so there's some regularities. So the question is, yes, the prototypical relations are there, but is it possible to model this by taking like one meaning as basic and then deriving the other from it? And I guess from what you've said now is like with your TVA example, I assume things can be broken that cannot be broken manually by hand, I assume. So if you I don't know, if you take a bulldozer and break in a wall, could that be broken?
Yes, it could be broken.
Yeah. So that doesn't seem to be so easy. So I guess I would just. So I really like your story and all that. It's just one.
No, I see your point. I mean, the prototypical relation is rather one way, right? It's like from the manner to the result, whereas the broken is much more flexible about the manner, of course. So if we have a bulldozer, there is no manual event description in there. Still, like I think with the monotonicity hypothesis, like a clear derivational account runs at least into some problems if we want the monotonicity hypothesis to hold, because this basically says that word formation only goes in one direction, basically adding stuff but not removing stuff. And in the case of the result state, we would need to remove this manner description here. So in the derivational account, we would have to find some solution for this, or some explanation for this, why this can be the case, at least in this context.
Okay, but thanks. Great talk. Great.
Thanks.
Sorry.
Okay, I think we have a little time for one more question. So Vera.
Thank you. So Jens, have you looked at the literature and kind of cross-linguistic variation in overt resultative constructions? I was just thinking about William Snyder's complex predicate parameter and von Stecho's proposal of principle R as points of variation in the grammar, where not all languages actually allowed events plus dative components to compare as a resultative. Would that mean, so what are the predictions of such variation for this configurational analysis? Because you would need some sort of compositional mechanism to get these readings for these structures as well, right? So I'm just wondering if it would be Interesting then to look at a language that has been argued to be minus complex predicate or minus principal R, and what the predictions would be for such a configuration analysis.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I think this has to some extent be discussed by like in this Foley and Harley paper I cite here,
Okay.
which try to explain the difference between like this satellite and verb framed languages, which I think somehow map to the Snyder, Beck and Snyder observation that you can that you get this interpretation of the manner verb causing the result state in this combination without like an offered realization of causative morphology. And they argue that in the languages where this is not possible, the result denoting element, whatever this is, whether it's a result P or an AP or a PP, must incorporate into the verb. And therefore, the manner root cannot be merged here because the categorization power, so to say, from the little v is already taken up by the complement that is moved into the little v head. So basically, because the little v head must recategorize its complement, it cannot additionally categorize a manner root, and therefore the manner root must be merged as a modifier into like a prepositional modifier or a gerund modifier, like in Spanish or Italian. And therefore, the interesting thing is that Daakaka is also like a language that does not allow, or at least it seems that it does not really allow the combination of a manner verb and the result stative verb to combine to give a resultative interpretation. This I've tried to hint that by giving you the translations as here, for example. So the Bong split the tree by cutting it, and not Bong cut the tree into pieces or something like that. So this is rather, we have a proper causative verb, and then the manner verb is just adjoined to it in this configuration. But this does not really then in fact has an impact on the configurational analysis per se, because this distinction between languages that allow this interpretation, relation, and not, is not a matter of the configuration itself, but rather on other, or can be explained in other, based on other morphosyntactic constraint on the language. Of course, only if you follow this categorization approach by Foley and Harley.
Yeah, I think my reasoning was more like, if you lack a composition of principle to give you that in the first place, then the syntax can't fix that, right? So that in a way, you're kind of saying syntax first. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, the idea would still be that this relation, which is always contextual, is still present, but it's just not able to see it in the same way in the two languages, because one structure is prohibited or constrained in one language, but not in the other.
Okay, so sorry, we're out of time for now, but